there's a way to make an entrance.
This is my destiny.
It was now a conspiracy of witches.
Download Veely today.
The slow passage of time on objects exposes these to all kinds of aggression. External agents and human activity act on them, damaging them, wearing them out, rusting them, rotting them. Water, fire, insects, and microorganisms are together with man their fiercest enemies. What makes man different from the other forces is that they are the only ones who can stop or hold back the process which, without their intervention, would be irreversible. Scientific interest in art conservation has developed over the last century based on science and technology. The main criterion is that nothing that is external or foreign to the piece should be added. In those cases where it is essential to transgress this general principle, two requirements should be rigorously met. Whatever has been added should be clearly appreciated, and it should also be possible to remove it without this jeopardizing the integrity of the whole. Moreover, in many cases, it is necessary for the piece of work to recover its function and arrangement. These requirements are the result of the experience accumulated by curators who have learned that a piece of work is never definitively restored. Technical advances occur very quickly, and respect for what could be done in the future makes restorers work cautiously so that their current intervention does not obstruct future restorations. All religions are the source of artistic manifestations. Gods and demons of all classes have arisen and been forgotten over the course of time, and been represented in aspects that are sometimes terrible and sometimes beautiful. In these artistic manifestations, humans have made use of the most varied elements. Symbols that come down through the centuries and which are repeated in places far from each other in time and space. Abstract forms such as this mysterious Polynesian funerary piece whose ultimate meaning is unknown, or this oriental idol that represents the god Atis. The relationship of man with the divine has been the origin of all kinds of objects, structures, arrangements, and monuments. Coincidences that are often surprising take place when cult symbols are compared. The pre-Columbian indigenous Quimbaya, who cast these pieces of gold, put a scepter topped by a spiral in the hand of their great priest. This piece is greatly reminiscent of those carried by those other great priests, the Catholic bishops, completely unknown to the Quimbaya. Every human being is a potential artist, and the irresistible need to express oneself has led us to use materials at hand in order to leave an imprint on time. An imprint that, once made, seems impossible to eliminate. The materials are those provided by nature in every period and place. Throughout time, artistic supports have varied, although somewhat less than you might suspect. Much of the world's pictorial heritage is being carried out in oil on canvas, in such a way that the technical basis of the restoration and conservation of these materials can be arranged in general stages that make up a process. This piece is being worked on at the Spanish Cultural Heritage Institute. The curator must obtain greater knowledge about the piece's nature before tackling the first stage of work, laying down the pictorial surface in those areas where it is at risk of being lost. Japanese paper impregnated with a special glue is used, and the curator also applies gentle heat locally. With the pictorial layer laid down, a deep cleaning process is carried out. First, a number of cleaning tests are carried out along the width of the picture's surface to evaluate the level of intervention required. The removal of possible repaints or the loss of pictorial material itself may give rise to a number of lacunas, which the restorer eliminates by means of a careful coating using plaster mixed with glue. With the layer of plaster leveled, an ideal paste is prepared for the application of watercolor which will mask the fault. In this way, a deliberate optical confusion is produced by the application of hatching and stippling techniques. The restorer traces a series of fine lines with the intention of confusing the spectator's eye chromatically. From a distance, intervention will not be perceived, although, like the stippling, it is quite clear when the picture is observed from close up. The restorer does not invent what is missing, but only masks it, so that the work is not affected when it is contemplated. This meets two fundamental rules: to ensure the intervention is reversible and to make sure what has been done is clear. When the watercolor has dried, the work is varnished again to guarantee that it is protected. Sometimes, due to the deterioration of the canvas support, it must be completely relined. It is necessary to know first where the work is to be hung after restoration, since it is crucial to know the dampness or dryness conditions of the hall when choosing materials and the tension of the new lining. We visit a private restoration workshop, a place where the specialist works with greater freedom, although this is not always the case. The type of intervention is the same as that carried out when dealing with a work belonging to an institution. The only difference is that an imitative reintegration is carried out, and this is documented in a report, with the materials used always being reversible. The guarantee that the work meets the general rules of artistic conservation is nothing other than the restorer's professional conscience. As an artistic material, wood is the base of a religious imagery. The number of images that have been carved in wood over time is incalculable. The Institute's sculpture department, on receiving every new commission, carries out a detailed examination with the aim of diagnosing the general condition of the work and establishing the most suitable treatment. The first consideration to bear in mind is whether this is a museum piece or a sculpture displayed for worship. Images that no longer have this function and which are conserved in museums receive the same treatment as works of art. Parts that have disappeared are not replaced. Intervention is carried out on them when this is necessary to maintain their endangered integrity or to stop them deteriorating further, with intervention aimed exclusively at consolidation and cleaning, avoiding any attempt at reintegration. On the other hand, images for worship must be complete, and so the restorer feels free to imitate and to add any missing parts or any which are damaged, with the condition that the interventions are reversible. Human skill is the only possible way to reintegrate carvings. Specialists in this job have more of the sculptor about them than the technician, and their task is based above all on observation and common sense. Master carvers are those who can best carry out the kind of restoration demanded by the Church for cult images. Work which represents a complete reintegration both of the carving and of its delicate polychromy. Stone has traditionally been one of the materials most used by man in his struggle against oblivion. From granite to alabaster, from limestone to basalt, sculptors have filled the world with their works. This Renaissance piece, which represents Peter of Castile in prayer, is being restored in the same room of the National Archaeological Museum in Madrid, where it is displayed to the public. It is not the first time it has been restored. In fact, the head is older than the body, which has lost the polychromy it once had, although it is still possible to find some slight remains. The work is cleaned and a reintegration process is carried out with synthetic resin, this being done in a way that is similar to hatching in pictorial restoration. The reintegration must be visible from close up, but must not be appreciable when the whole is viewed. The partial deterioration of large and impressive marble pieces often requires major reintegration. In these cases, the intention is to reconstruct the volume to recover the sensation of the whole and to facilitate display. The reintegrated parts are easily detected. One of the great debates regarding stone sculpture restoration is that about the patina, whether this is an addition by the work's artist to improve its appearance or for better conservation, or whether the patina is the effect caused by the passage of time on materials, corrosion, accumulated dirt, etc. From the point of view of the restoration, normally intervention is done on this patina created by the passage of time. There is no single criterion when deciding how much intervention is to be done. There are those who support aggressive intervention, a thorough cleaning of the material, and those with more conservative criteria, who do a superficial cleaning, conserving the patina as long as it is stable and is not causing problems, thus maintaining the idea of an ancient piece. The restorer decides in each case, with the help of advice, on the depth of application of each of the cleaning treatments. Gold is a material much appreciated by religions. It is a material that the medieval scribes and illuminators used a great deal to ennoble their works. Now those fine manuscripts on parchment have become an essential source of knowledge about the Middle Ages. Their restoration and conservation is carried out at the Cultural Heritage Institute. Parchment, which is calfskin that has been cleaned, scraped and stretched, is an extraordinarily durable material. Although it is also very sensitive to variations in humidity, it was used for centuries before paper was manufactured and became popular. Beautiful works have been painted on it, such as the Missali Hispalensis from the 14th and 15th centuries in 4 volumes, which is being restored at the Institute. This work was created by hands that carried out this delicate work of shape and color, by hands that skillfully added gold to its decoration, but also suffered from more covetous hands, who mutilated it to sell separately many of its little treasures, such as its beautiful capital letters. In fact, as with many other works, it has been a victim of its own beauty. The process of working with this material is quite similar to the restoration of works on paper, but the support is different. Animal skin has very different characteristics to the conglomerate of vegetable fibers that is paper. Therefore, the different stages of restoring parchment demand hard work and manual skill from the specialists. The reintegration of lost materials must be done using patterns based on what is missing, whose edges are trimmed down to the level of the damaged original's edges, which have also been trimmed. The final aim is to recover the book's function, re-establishing its original structure. The damage done by the hands of men is no greater than that caused by the elements. Fire has caused havoc with this wonderful miniature leaf with scenes of the Passion that is part of a 16th century choir book. However, what remains is beautiful enough to merit the consolidation work that its curator carefully carries out. Institutional documents from other centuries were attached to seals made from different materials: gold, silver, lead. These seals now have great historical value and are subject to restoration work. Very worn wax seals, on the other hand, can be replaced with exact copies, obtained from molds taken from another copy of the same seal, conserved in good condition. This shapeless and almost unidentifiable mass is a valuable manuscript that was rescued from a barricade during the Spanish Civil War after having suffered all kinds of brutal attacks. Even though it seemed an impossible task, the Institute's Books and Manuscripts Service set about recovering it. Of course, there was no way of replacing the lost parts, but at least the piece can be given back its good condition, and the conserved parts can be stabilized. Books and manuscripts hold an important part of our collective memory. From the material point of view, a book is nothing other than a folded surface. It is necessary to bear this in mind to understand the magnitude of the task that faces the restorer. The pieces that reach the department have been victims of very different misfortunes. Perhaps recovered from fires or floods, devoured by insects, colonized by fungi, or attacked by microbes. Without the detailed and patient work of this team, it would be necessary to give them up as irrecoverable. The criteria that are followed are absolute respect for the piece's originality, whoever created it, its original structure, and of course for its own history. In the case of books, the recovery process begins with the unbinding and numbering of the pages, which allows each of them to be handed individually. The subject of the work is reduced in this way to a support, paper, to which one of a number of liquid pigments in the form of inks were applied. The restorer's first consideration, then, is the conservation level of each of these two components and the interaction that the passage of time has produced between them. The stability of the inks determines whether the documents can be washed or whether dry treatment is necessary. In the first case, they are washed and dried before the second stage of the process occurs, the mechanical reintegration of the paper when it has suffered losses due to the action of external agents. It is necessary firstly to determine the characteristics of the paper to be used to fill in the losses in the original. Faithful to the criterion of making the restoration evident, the idea is to replace them with a material that is not identical, but nonetheless similar. First, a paste of paper pulp with similar characteristics to the original is made, and then mixed in the right proportion with already pigmented papers until the exact tone is achieved. Then the sheet of paper is put into an ingenious mechanism that allows the mechanical reintegration of the original's missing areas with the prepared pulp. When each and every one of the pages that make up the book have been treated in this way, sometimes a special laminate is added to increase the strength of the ensemble, and the leaves are put together and rebound, giving the book back its functional nature. After a last check and the erasure of the control numbers, the book is ready to be returned to the shelf of the library from where it came. The Institute sometimes receives unusual materials, such as this anatomy textbook drawn by the Nobel laureate in medicine, Santiago Ramón y Cajal, for the classes that he gave at Zaragoza University. The sheets are done with a support of ordinary paper, of the kind used for wrapping. The material is colored wax, and so washing it is not even considered. Coincidence allows us to observe an unusual image. Using a tool with a surgical appearance, the curator carries out something similar to the surgeon's work. However, what he does is to separate a fragment of the sheet in order to restructure the back, removing the old pastes that caused wrinkles and tension, stopping the piece from relaxing. Every book is a different world. This restorer is working on a manuscript from 1389. The reintegration of this book could be done mechanically, but because of its texture and unique nature, it is done manually. In the case of an attack from book-eating creatures, a pulp is prepared with paper and cellulose glue that is put into the holes, and then dried with the spatula. In lost areas and grafts, and to consolidate the edges, the manual reintegration is carried out with this manufactured paper, opening it, leaving the long fiber so that it can be attached, and has good consistency for when it is joined to the original. However, the greatest peculiarity about this book is its content. This is a non-holograph manuscript of the Book of Good Love, written by Juan Ruiz, Archpriest of Ita. The restorer holds one of the greatest monuments of Spanish medieval literature. It is impossible to identify the time and place that man learned to melt down silica sand to make glass objects. But the Romans had a flourishing industry in this material, supported by a strong demand. Glass objects were once a luxury accessory, although they later became popular as special recipients for holding liqueurs, perfumes, and ointments. The fantasy of craftsmen had found in the plastic mass of melted sand a new vehicle for their works. Archaeological glass raises a series of specific problems for the curator. The surface of the object sometimes presents a kind of exfoliation in the form of iridescent scales, about whose removal there are opposing views. In the restoration workshops of the National Archaeological Museum in Madrid, these scales are removed as long as the general condition of the piece allows this. In this way, the idea is to recover its transparency. It seems impossible that these delicate bottles and containers have stayed intact for 2 millennia. But we should not forget that glass is a very hard material. Its passive resistance to time is great because it is a material that does not combine with other elements in nature. However, it is also a fragile material. When pieces appear with cracks that are not too large, the manual reintegration of the faults is carried out with synthetic resins that have been previously pigmented to give them the same color as the piece if necessary. The integration is carried out using a wax mold as a base, and this is then given the finishing touch. Once more, the restorer has met the maxim that everything added to the original should be clearly appreciated as an addition. The first synthetic resins used were less stable than current ones. The reintegrated parts on this piece restored years ago have shrunk, endangering its integrity. It is a lesson about the degree of trust that should be put in new materials before testing their response to the passage of time. The curators of the American Museum in Madrid face the difficulty of attending to very different pieces, complementary in some ways to those on display at the National Archaeological Museum, which are no less heterogeneous. Both worlds are found in this difference. Both used clay to make different volumes, often guided by the same needs of usefulness and beauty. This is how the Greeks did it. And the indigenous Peruvians from the moche culture. They did it this way. Among the moche of Peru, the potters were always women. They only had the sacred task of modeling these funerary containers that have been found in graves, or huacas. As happens with many aspects of the indigenous art, the religious or mythological bases of these pieces are unknown. It is not clear even whether those representing human heads are reliable portraits of the deceased. There are reasons to think the opposite if we bear in mind that some of them are identical. At the Archaeological Museum Ceramic Restoration Workshop, work is done on very extensive remains that make up a select collection of the pieces found in Spain over the centuries. Some of them are found in such a fragmented state that it is necessary to first carry out delicate reconstruction work that is a lot like a puzzle. With the fragments in place, they are joined, forming ever larger sections. When all of them are together, it is clear what parts have been lost, and these missing areas can be reintegrated. Then the pieces to be added are polished and covered with a layer of color similar to that of the work, but maintaining a clear difference that identifies the restoration. Ceramics in very different states reach the museum. There is ceramic that arrives fresh from the archaeological site, in which case the problems are the removal of earth and salt stuck to the piece, or its fragmentation. The mineral salts, which can sometimes completely cover the original decoration, must be identified using reagents before they are removed. The other kind of ceramic that arrives already has restoration from different periods, made using different criteria. Simple restorations using simple glues that fit within the current lines of the restoration, and very complete phases of reintegration that even cover the original piece in order to pretend that it has never been in a fragmented state, because sometimes the integrity of the piece was prized more than the piece's value. This is the case with this Greek vessel painted by a great Athenian artist, totally covered with a black paste to hide the fragmentation and theoretically increase its market value at the end of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century. Clay was one of the first materials used by humans to meet their needs and to express their beliefs. This piece, unique in its genre, is a Celto-Iberian necklace made of ceramic, to which its discoverer wanted to associate profound cosmological content. According to him, it was a kind of representation of the world. The scientific expeditions of the 18th century went to the most remote countries in search of information and returned to Europe with their stores full of strange objects that they would later catalogue and study. These were objects that arrived from lands whose cultures were unknown and which, without any context, would be as difficult to interpret as if they came from another planet. The only thing known about this curious piece is that it probably came from one of the voyages of exploration to the islands of Oceania. It is made of mother of pearl and wood, elements that are perfectly coherent with its place of origin. Fortunately, old prints still survive from which it is possible to know something more. This illustration from the voyages of Captain Cook shows a scene of the funerary rites of the Pacific Islands. The body appears on a platform, tupapu, and in front of it there is a person with a similar piece. Therefore, as has happened on so many other occasions, the object has survived beyond what it was made for. And now we have the symbol, but we do not know the most important thing, the meaning it had for those who used it. An example of restoration of a whole is that of this unusual votive or ritual piece found in Piquillazca, 20 kilometers from Cuzco in Peru. We know nothing about the ultimate meaning of this curious structure. Each of its 40 figures is different from the others, but it also has elements of the others. They are carved in turquoise, and some have seen in it the representation of a founding rite, where the different powers of a mysterious pre-Inca society are shown. In this world, everything is restored. Even the world is restored. In the 17th century, the first representations of the planet became popular both for educational purposes and to adorn the studies of the learned and enlightened people. These 17th century globes are being restored at the National Archaeological Museum, although they were restored more than 100 years ago. This Earth pairs up with another showing a map of the heavens, with the main zodiacal and circumpolar constellations being very easy to recognize. The spheres are made of wood or card, with a representation of the world painted or printed on paper attached. The pieces are mounted on a support and supported by a horizontal band showing the degrees of longitude. The use of these objects has contributed more to damaging them than any other factor. The uncountable times that a hand has rested on them to turn them has dirted them profoundly and put them off their axis. The intervention has been limited to a surface cleaning, the removal of repaint, and then the application of a protective layer. This astrolabe, restored in the Department of Books and Documents at the Cultural Heritage Institute, is an extremely interesting piece. This is an educational instrument to introduce students into the secrets of using it. The restorer must consider different alternatives when facing such a complex piece. The references were painted on paper, and for them to be cleaned correctly, it would be necessary to lift it and then put it back again. But the paper surface is not one piece. Rather, it is made of several that must later be adjusted meticulously. In the end, the decision is made to clean the surface of the paper without removing it. The metallurgical techniques of the New World have surprising aspects, as shown by the collection of gold figures from the Quimbaya culture at the America Museum, which have revealed some of these aspects. Gold has never been abundant. The Quimbaya, who thrived in what is now Colombia between the 7th and 11th centuries of our era, found a way of making gold go much further. Their funerary figures seem to have been recently removed from a metal polisher. The appearance could not be more dazzling. However, all that glitters is not gold. The Quimbaya understood the techniques of metallurgy very well, and they developed a technique called tumbaga. It was the treatment of a plating with a very low gold content, 8 or 10%, which, treated with vegetable acids, urine and then fire, corroded and eliminated the non-precious metals, leaving the surface covered in the precious metal. With a final polish, they obtained a surface that was completely golden, as if the piece were made of solid gold. In old Europe, the treatment of metals goes back much further. Bronze, a metal which in a free state tends to combine with other elements, is subject to progressive and irreversible damage, which can result in complete mineralization and disintegration. Bronze surfaces develop oxides, carbonates, and very dangerous chlorides, which activate in the presence of humidity, however clean the metallic surface is. These chlorides are responsible for the complete loss of many ancient bronze pieces. Often, the statues require major intervention to show the fragments remaining from the whole in a coherent way. It is necessary to reconstitute large areas that have disappeared to hold the original remains. In these cases, the reintegrated parts should be particularly clear, and they must fulfill the function of being mere structural supports. Bronze objects can give us a great deal of information. Metal treatment techniques allow a number of them to be combined, making them an expressive vehicle. This sculpture represents the Oriental god Atis, and it was perhaps brought to Spain by Roman legionaries. It has gone through a process of partial reintegration, and during the last cleaning, yellow decoration along its trousers appeared, and so it received the popular name of the mariachi singer. In terms of iron, a raw material for tools and especially weapons, its main enemy is rust, which triggers the same process in iron as chlorine does in bronze. Unfortunately, the processes by which iron mineralizes are much more active, and so the archaeological discovery of iron usually supplies little information. Iron requires robust intervention, which does not give good results, since the surface alterations due to oxidization are normally so serious that every trace of decoration is destroyed, unless it has been carried out in combination with more resistant metals, like silver. Regarding archaeological iron objects, we should learn to be content to have an approximate idea of its exterior shape. It is better not to strengthen twisted objects because the loss of the metallic core could be so serious that the piece, lacking flexibility, would break up into 1,000 pieces if it was subject to pressure. Perhaps in the future it'll be possible to undertake this enterprise with certain guarantees, but not for now. Compared with the treatment of metals, the conservation of especially delicate materials such as feathers demands very different criteria. Feather art is a particularly subtle world in which only a few specialists in the world act with confidence. Were those merely whims, those combinations of color and shape that make up these headdresses, those sometimes beautiful and sometimes disconcerting adornments? Or perhaps their selection and combination was part of a mysterious language, an accumulation of esoteric references that only the initiated could interpret. In any case, the feather art curator's task demands the same respect for the original piece as any other. Here we are dealing with three-dimensional structures with attachments that are very different. Joined together with frames, tar or vegetable fibers, most of these pieces are very old. Some have been discarded in drawers in studies and storerooms for centuries. Their current state shows that behind an apparent fragility, they hide an impressive power to survive. Museums also hold certain very special materials. Materials that curators limit themselves to attempting to keep intact for fear that they disintegrate in their hands. This Peruvian mummy comes from Paracas in the central Andes, and it is probably more than 2,000 years old, corresponding to the early intermediate period. Its magnificent state of conservation is surprising, as is that of the decorations it was buried with. Its necklaces and chest decorations shine, as do the gold adornments. The mantle is very rich, and it is adorned with symbolic and geometric motifs whose meaning has been lost to us. The information that a scientific analysis of this piece will provide for those who undertake it will be extraordinary. Together with the mummy, a bag with an interesting trousseau appeared, and so it is suspected that this was a person with a connection to the work of spinning and fabrics. Perhaps it was she herself who created the rich vestments that are on display at the American Museum. One of the most unusual pieces to be restored is this human head, shrunken by the Jibaro Indians. This peculiarity of the tribe was a kind of security system. The intruder would have to think twice before invading Jibaro territory. The head is empty inside, and its state of conservation is excellent. The Jibaros made work that lasted. Another head removed from its body, that of Medusa, whose gaze, according to myth, turned to stone anyone who met it. Now it is she who is converted into stone. In the thousands of small stones and tesserae that make up this Roman mosaic exhibited at the National Archaeological Museum. Mosaics do not normally appear complete. Their integrity depends on the conservation of all their pieces and on the firmness of the support they are attached to. When some go missing, their neighbors notice and tend to loosen and come off, and so the lost surface gets larger and larger. Reintegration is possible if the lacunas are not excessive or do not affect large areas of the mosaic. In other cases, any possible reintegration is rejected since the information has been lost forever. Therefore, it is necessary to accept the fact that most antique mosaics appear incomplete. In the Americas, the mosaics were made of feathers. The Christianized indigenous inhabitants learned to use this feather art, using this delicate labor to represent religious iconography. The saints and virgins that are subject to the greatest prestige and devotion in their churches were reproduced naively, or they followed the same patterns as Catholic iconography, tracing prints that were alien to their own cultural roots. Work was also done in the Americas on mother-of-pearl mosaics, in which the inlay of this material was alternated with paint. The skill of this delicate work is surprising, and it was used to represent all kinds of sacred scenes, images, and miracles, but also heroic scenes from the history of the conquest. This technique flourished in Mexico at the end of the 17th century and never became a popular art, but was very localized. The best collection is conserved in the stores of Madrid's America Museum. The syncretism of these modest pieces makes clear the inevitable dialogue that religious art has constantly kept up within itself, over and above the apparent differences of beliefs and cults. The love of art drives us to conservation. Man protects and testifies to his own memory in this way, increasing self-knowledge, and this enriches him. The work of conservation leads us to recover the colors and forms of the past, returning them to the present. More evidence of the human need to struggle against death.